The ridiculously low price of a few pennies was not the only secret of the paper's marvelous success. What the directors of the big newspapers did not know and would never understand was the true starting point of the little journal. For 9 days before the appearance of the first issue, the 327 Franciscan men of labor prayed night and day before the Blessed Sacrament. They fasted and did penance, fervently recommending their noble project to the patroness of the enterprise. Then and only then did they put their powerful presses in motion. With these highly trained workmen, prayer always preceded action. The hierarchy of values was jealously observed. Although the spiritual was given first place, the material side did not suffer in the least. Quite the contrary. These contemplatives were outstanding technicians, qualified in many fields and always alert to improvement and progress. The practical genius of Father Maximilian sought holy workmen at Niepokalanów, veritable saints formed by perfect fidelity to duty. One cannot run machines with a Hail Mary, but one can convert the flawless rumbling of a rotary press into a Magnificat. The good priest would not tolerate half-hearted amateurs, and he often repeated high his letters the old adage, age quod agis, that is, attend to the business you have at hand. To understand this more clearly, let us visit the friars on the premises of Niepokalanów. We pass over the interval of 9 years that has elapsed since the day when Father Maximilian came to enthrone the statue of the Immaculata high this desert. We are faced by an entire village, which, from a distance, looks like an industrial town. The friar attending the door smiles and leads us to the guardian, the director of this vast enterprise. We enter a small, whitewashed room of about 9 square yards. The only furniture is a table, 2 stools, 2 shelves lined with books and, in a corner, an iron bed and a wash basin. The furniture is white wood. On the table, there is a telephone and, of course, a statuette of the Immaculata. This strict poverty that we meet everywhere emits a character of nobility all its own. At Niepokalanów nothing is common. The guardian seems very young and has very soft but penetrating eyes. I do not wonder at all that certain friars attribute to him the gift of reading hearts. He wears a bushy graying beard, which he strokes with a certain tranquility, and often smiles with a childlike candor, showing all his teeth. He does not appear sick, but he does seem very much worn out. We learn that he came back from Japan recently. He welcomes us with Franciscan hospitality and immediately lifts the receiver to inform the brother cook that there are friends here who look as though they are willing to take a cup of tea. A few moments later, a very young brother radiant with happiness appears, bearing a large tray with a teapot and some tin cups. At Niepokalanów chinaware is banned, and Monsignor the Nuncio and His Eminence the Cardinal must use those same cups which, moreover, they do with good grace. The priest answers our questions simply. He very carefully avoids any reference to himself, and we feel that he really considers himself an unimportant figure in this colossal work. Should the question arise, he changes the subject. However, as soon as anyone mentions the Blessed Virgin, he springs to life and, with face aglow, makes some characteristic remark, such as, "She is our whole life. It is she who does everything. Through her, we want to win for Christ every soul in the entire world, those souls that are and those yet to be until the end of time." He speaks with such a fervent and quivering voice and a face so transfigured that we understand at once what these awkward words are hiding and what resplendent reality has become incarnate in these poor barracks. We are invited to see the workshops. In each room a statue of the Immaculata is enthroned. Each crew of workers kneels down upon entering, offers a brief prayer before work, and immediately occupies the appointed posts. Silence during work is a strict rule, and they can break it only in cases of real necessity, and even then only in a low voice. In the vast halls we hear only the rumbling of the motors, the whistling of the transmissions and the rhythmical noise of the powerful presses that hand over each hour 20,000 copies of the review, stitched and ready for shipping. Another crew of workmen immediately takes possession of them for sorting into districts and addressing. To achieve maximum output they work systematically in groups of 3 which handle the neatly cut stacks. Dissatisfied with the addressing machines which were imported from abroad, a brother who was a specialist invented a new model, which at once won a prize at the exhibition at Poznan. This machine doubled the previous output. In this shipping department, silence is likewise observed. The young and meditative faces reflect much joy and a degree of fatigue. It is the end of the day's work. All heads turn toward the guardian, and all their eyes smile at him. He greets them as usual, Maria. And they answer softly, pronouncing the same name, Maria. Pervading these workshops there is an indefinable atmosphere, an impressive simplicity. The machines, directed by expert and fervent hands, seem really to pray. Strictly technical and performed by highly competent hands, the work is surpassed without fail by an intention of love that transforms it into liturgy. These workers talk of their sister press and brother motor in the same accents with which Saint Francis speaks of the birds and flowers. Indeed, he would have known them for his sons by their language. I suddenly remember how one day Father Maximilian had sung the praise of Brother Motor which was about to enter solemnly into service. What should I wish for it, he said, except that it faithfully serve its queen and mistress. Today it is blessed and it becomes a religious. Then they will start to adjust it, that will be its novitiate. And when they make it run, it will make profession. What more can I wish for it? That it work a long time. That it have a great many companions. That it be efficient? Well, no, I do not wish anything else for it. Whatever it may do, only one thing is of consequence, that it follow blindly the desires of the Blessed Virgin. A good religious is good, not because he does much, but because he obeys. Thus, Brother Motor will be a good religious if, thanks to the intervention of the brother mechanic, it does what the Immaculata will ask it to do. If she wishes, may it be out of order as soon as tomorrow. If she wishes, may it work 100 years and more, and may it earn what is necessary to procure for us more brother motors. Is this not the language of the Fioretti? It is surprising that in this workers' republic there are only 6 priests but more than 700 brothers who have the responsibility of management in the name of holy obedience. In his genius for organization, Father Maximilian never wanted blind instruments, and no one desired more than he to train the friars in a sense of responsibility and in the spirit of inventiveness. Each friar has the right to ask to work in the section that suits him best and to apply for a change when he feels himself losing interest. Of course, holy obedience will sometimes keep him where he is, but always for reasons which can be made evident. Father Maximilian detests the absurdity of needless specialization. He desires that each friar know all phases of his specialty and purposely makes him pass from one workshop to another. At Niepokalanów, there are no robots, only workmen proud of their vocations and ennobled by this total gift that transforms them into associates of God. In the administration offices of Niepokalanów there is a special box with a poster which reads, Inventions and Projects, where each friar has the right to deposit his ideas for improvement. Under the control of a special committee, these proposals are very often put high force and increase the quality of production. Looking at these open, young, and intelligent faces, I am not surprised that Niepokalanów has several patents among its assets. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Are there many vocations? We asked the priest. Oh, yes, each year about 1800 candidates apply. But we apply rigid screening tests. At the end of these, about 100 enter, scarcely 50 of whom reach profession. We must be selective because, he hesitates an instant, Niepokalanów must be a school of saints. Among the postulants, there are a great many specialized workmen who were successfully earning their living high the world. There are others with college educations, architects, engineers, assistant professors. Niepokalanów is really self-sufficient, for all professions are represented here. It would require an entire chapter, and a most interesting one, to write about their fire department and its wide and numberless achievements. At first glance, a brother workman cannot be distinguished from the priest editor. He wears the same kind of religious habit, worn and patched, he eats the same food. Father Maximilian shows no partiality. All priests and brothers are and must be treated the same way, and anyone guilty of making an exception to the rule is severely punished. The single privilege of the chiefs is to have a private cell with furniture exactly the same as that of the father guardian. Most of the brothers sleep in large dormitories. They tell delightful stories about the righteous anger of Father Maximilian when he discovered that they had secretly granted him some privilege. Every time he found a new garment in his cell, he would invariably ask, "Have all the fathers as much?" He permitted no exception. Sometimes they had to resort to tricks to make him put on a new sweater or in order to substitute new shoes for his old ones. Only the sick are privileged. For them there is special cooking, and they receive all the remedies they need, even the most expensive. For them he provides the most qualified specialists, the most expensive cures, the greatest comfort possible. Father Maximilian literally spoils them. He himself has been very sick too long not to know how much one can suffer in an infirmary. Even on the busiest working days he goes on his rounds to visit his dear sick ones, to tell them how much he needs their help and how all Niepokalanów counts on them. If visitors indiscreetly ask him where in that buzzing hive most work is done, he leads them into the house of rest surrounded by fir trees, answers, "Here," and shows them his dear sick ones. In the dining room there are endless tables made of whitewood and, naturally, at the end of the room a little altar where the Immaculata presides. The friars pray before meals. How they pray! Each word is carefully measured and carries the mark of an inexpressible fervor. Together in chorus, the friars recite this verse which the visitor at Niepokalanów will hear more than once again, Dies cantos est, et qui mene in caritate, in Deo mene, et Deus in eo, God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him. 1 John 4:16. In listening to them we feel that we detect their secret. It is love that has united them, it is love that keeps them, not an idea nor a myth, but the one who is love. The food is simple, but good, and abundant. At Niepokalanów no one is hungry. They all eat from the same kind of tin plates, with the same kind of spoons. On visiting days there is often a Deo gratias which unties the tongues and fills the vast dining room with a joyous buzzing. But usually there is a jealously observed silence, for Father Maximilian attaches great importance to it. How will you hear the voice of God, he says, if you make too much noise? He speaks to you, but in silence. The business leaders who come to look around out of simple curiosity for Niepokalanów begins to have a renown of sanctity as well as of offense very quickly find themselves astounded and entirely out of place. One of them laughingly said to me one day, "It is very strange, technician and mystic walking arm in arm." To really understand these friars, we must follow them to the chapel. It also is a simple shed, pending the future basilica that Father Maximilian will not see. The chapel is filled to capacity with young Franciscans on their knees, praying with such fervent intensity that their faces grow radiant. The rule provides 3 hours and a half of prayer and meditation each day. But their work is a continuous prayer. Indeed, they have a great many occasions for listening to God and for hearing Him. This up-to-date industrial enterprise, which surpasses all records and is considered a model of technical efficiency, has its roots deeply plunged in the supernatural. This is what brings it so much persecution, so much slander, and such angry criticism not only from the powers of hell but also from the supposedly well-disposed, who like to reconcile God and mammon. Nevertheless, even their enemies cannot avoid an occasional compliment. One day, some merchants came to Niepokalanów on business. Having visited everywhere and seen all, one of them made a sort of confession to Father Maximilian. "I am a communist." Before the war, the Communist Party had no legal existence in Poland. "But I must tell you that it is the first time that I have found our ideas realized. You are real communists." He thought it the most beautiful compliment he could invent. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Chapter 12, World Plan, Part 2, The Far East. There was a time centuries ago when the little brothers went 2 by 2 to announce to the world the good tidings of Christ's gospel. Today, they take advantage of the services of our sister machine and fling to the four winds innumerable printed pages. Each epoch has its own methods. Father Maximilian joyfully welcomed all discoveries and took possession of them immediately in order to consecrate them. All the fruits of human genius, he used to say, must be mobilized for the service and glory of God and His Immaculata. On the eve of the war he was high the process of equipping Niepokalanów with an airport with 4 runways for the time being, as he would say. He established a broadcasting station, which was working very well. And he wanted to hire the best actors for Catholic films. Everything he said and did displayed a joyful, Catholic optimism that believed vehemently in the triumph of good. He condemned nothing, he disapproved of nothing except sin. Far from turning his back upon the age in which he lived, he flung out his arms to embrace it and to hold it. He took care not to call down fire from heaven upon the cockle. The Lord of harvests has from the very beginning sowed wheat. It is useless for the enemy to prowl during the night, for heavy ears of grain dispute the field against the weeds of evil. More than once in his letters we find the appeal for patient winnowing. We must glean from error the grains of truth which are buried in it, he would say, retake what is ours, and leave the rest to die from simple futility. His method was eminently positive, adaptable, and deadly to the adversary, for it took up the enemy's own arms and engaged him on his own ground. It would require an entire chapter to write concerning Father Maximilian and communism. Had he not the ingenuity to apply the first 5-year plan in the service of the Immaculata at Niepokalanów? This work and these towering projects should have been enough to satisfy him. But no, his perspective was without horizon. Only one who failed to understand Father Maximilian could think he had forgotten his vow as an ardent young novice, to conquer the entire world, all souls for Christ, through the Immaculata. Far from being his sole objective, Poland was only a springboard. It is here that we must relate the most marvelous episode of this story, one that resembles a fairy tale. Scarcely 3 years after the foundation of Niepokalanów, when its management would seem to claim full attention and effort, Father Maximilian set out on a mission. It happened that one day he met some Japanese students on the train. They began to chat and, of course, he offered them miraculous medals, his shells, which he always carried in his pockets. In exchange, the students gave him some small wooden elephants which they used as charms. After this incident, he frequently gave compassionate thought to these souls who lived without Christ. After full consideration, he presented himself at the headquarters of his provincial and, as if it were simply a matter of course, told him that he would like to go to Japan to establish another Niepokalanów. "Have you the money?" Father Provincial asked in amazement. "No, Father Provincial." "Do you know the Japanese language?" "No." "Have you at least some friends over there, some support?" Not yet, but with the grace of God I will find some. Let us put ourselves for an instant in the place of the provincial, the prudent, and sensible Father Chukrik. Quite as usual, Father Maximilian begged him above all not to let himself be influenced by him. He told his provincial that his one desire was to be blindly obedient and that the Immaculata would manifest her good pleasure to her servant Maximilian through the instrumentality of his superiors. If only he had been disposed to argue. But no, he made only a bland statement of his case. Here is the plan, foolish though it may seem. And now, Reverend Father, it is for you to decide. You are the spokesman of God. Whatever you may decide, you know very well that I will obey immediately and without comment. I am sure that after the first bombshell, although Father Maximilian slept like a little child, his superiors passed a sleepless night. How to resist his proposal? Is not Niepokalanów tangible proof that this 7-day wonder is always right? He had the gift of making nothingness bear fruit. That which our limited human prudence rates as an adventure in folly may perhaps turn out to be but a normal course in divine providence. Suppose, therefore, we give his plan a trial. Father Maximilian was a wonderfully captivating person. Everyone of good will ended by following him, and the superior who had been the most skeptical grew just as foolish and even became his most zealous collaborator. It is in this way that our selfish and cramped hearts expand all at once through contact with a saint. What he tells us we always knew, but somehow we never really understand it. It was a favorite saying of Father Maximilian that good is more contagious than evil. He obtained full authorization at last and on February 26, 1930 set out with 4 brothers for far distant Japan. He crossed France and stopped at Lourdes and Lisieux, but, as usual, he did not write much about these visits in his letters. We like to imagine him at the grotto in Lourdes. You can feel the presence of the Immaculata here, he writes. His letters are impulsive, lively, delightful with a childlike freshness. Obviously to amuse his little brothers, he wrote, I have just seen the chessmen that belong to Saint Therese of Lisieux. This is to console our unrepentant chess addicts. Sometimes in the correspondence of this period the note becomes more serious. Nothing causes me more suffering than the mediocrity of souls vowed to the Blessed Virgin. I would give my life 1,000 times to sanctify them. We are the property of the Immaculata, her possession. She has all rights over us. We are her knights, ready to go wherever she bids, willing to do whatever she asks. As varied as the flowers of the field are the works within the Church of Christ. Our common end is the cause of the Immaculata. Only the fathomless treasures of Providence can compete with the ingots of the Prince of this world. We must sacrifice our life to our ideal, not subordinate our ideal to our life. It was a blessed journey that occasioned this precious correspondence. Father Maximilian scarcely speaks of himself, but between the lines his soul shines through. There is always the same full tone, the same rare atmosphere of the summits. Although he sometimes dashes off his scribbled notes, the same overtone of high sanctity vibrates through every line. They embarked at Marseilles. On the boat and during the landings at port, Father Maximilian made numerous conquests, for his irresistible charm won friends instantaneously. Naturally, as good Franciscans they traveled on the deck and shared the lot of the poorest travelers. Always joyful, obliging and humble, they preached among all these foreigners much more through example than by word. They spent their spare time struggling with the first lessons of the Japanese language. At Saigon, Father Maximilian had time to come in contact with the clergy of the Annamite Rite and obtained on the spot their consent to publish his review. At Shanghai, the Catholic millionaire, Lo Pengho, put himself at his service and offered him the money to publish a Chinese review. Unfortunately, the plan failed because other missionaries opposed it. The city is divided into spheres of influence, he wrote sadly. We can act only in the Franciscan zone. The pagans are very willing to help us, all the difficulties come from the Christians. Leaving 2 of the brothers at Shanghai in hopes of starting the MI there, Father Maximilian proceeded with the other 2 to Nagasaki, where he landed April 24, 1930. Entering the port, the boat coasted along the picturesque islands, where for 3 centuries vestiges of Christianity had been preserved. In their bamboo huts they still kept their statues of the Blessed Virgin, Sibo, sometimes too similar to the one of Goddess Quantum. Under ashes the flame continues to burn. Who will give it back its former brightness? The task of the missionary promised to be arduous, for at great price and as quickly as possible he had to make blood of the many martyrs bear fruit. Was he thinking of the Polish Jesuit, Adalbert Messinski, contemporary of Saint Andrew Bobola, who went to Japan longing to die for the faith and there won his martyr's palm? Did he reflect upon the innumerable Japanese martyrs, so little known in Europe, who remained intrepid and faithful until the end despite torture and death? Looking at these islands of the cherry blossoms, Father Maximilian suddenly recalled his beautiful red crown. He asked in a low voice, "Is this, Immaculate Mother, the place that you have prepared for me?" First of all, the Japanese situation required that the missionary be very clever, very practical, and acutely diplomatic. All these qualities the little Polish priest possessed in an eminent degree. He began by carefully observing this strange and unknown world. He very quickly registered all that he wanted to know. Walking the picturesque and swarming streets of Nagasaki, he often lifted his gaze toward the Hill of Martyrs, where 3 centuries earlier thousands of Christians had paid with their blood for fidelity to the faith which the Polish brothers were bringing them from so far away. Could one dream of more powerful allies? His Excellency, Bishop Hayasaki, of Nagasaki, smiled on hearing the intentions of the missionaries who had recently landed from far-off Parando. The plan to publish a review without funds seemed to him completely fantastic. But when he learned that Father Maximilian was a doctor of theology and philosophy, he at once asked him to give some courses in his seminary. Father Maximilian seized the occasion on the wing. "Gladly, Your Excellency, but on the condition that you permit us to publish the review." Disconcerted, the bishop looked at him. This poor missionary had an air of decision about him. "Let us give the good Lord a chance," he thought. In his high voice he gave the answer, "It is a bargain, but you must manage for yourself." They had arrived on April 24. On May 24, Father Maximilian cabled the following message to Niepokalanów: "Today we are sending out our first issue. Have a printing establishment. Praise be to the Immaculata. Maximilian." After reading and rereading this telegram, the little brothers looked at each other in amazement. Even though they were habitually confident, such success surpassed all their dreams. What had produced this extraordinary man, who on principle had banned the word impossible from his vocabulary? Before all else, he naturally made use of 2 chief resources: first, prayer, and then a penance which consisted especially in an extreme and perfect poverty. It was this poverty that crushed all suspicion and won at once the hearts of these dear pagans. The Japanese are very responsive to the total sacrifice of self to a noble cause. They know how to deprive themselves, and they measure the ideal of the stranger by the degree of deprivation that he is capable of imposing upon himself in the name of his ideal. To see these missionaries who were eating poorly, sleeping little, living in the open air, and asking only one thing, namely, to have the Japanese share in the superabundance of joy which was sparkling in their eyes and vibrating in their voices, this made them realize that it was not selfish interest which had brought the Polish missionaries. From the very beginning, Father Maximilian had in them a whole band of willing helpers even among those who were Protestant. It is interesting to note that the first Japanese translator of the articles which Father Maximilian wrote in Latin or Italian was a Methodist who was converted. However, he held fast and went on working. Far from defeating him, trials spurred him onward. To really understand his indomitable energy, we must go back to its source and call upon the science of saints. A letter dating from this period sketches the project of other invasions. As soon as our work is well established in Japan, I will leave to make foundations in India and afterward at Beirut for the Arabs. I expect to publish the review in Turkish, Persian, Arabian and Hebrew. And so the action of the militia will reach 1,000 million readers, one half of the inhabitants of the globe. At this time, the printing amounted to only 10,000 copies. Voluntary hawkers went about the country and solicited more subscribers, offering free copies and asking in exchange the visiting cards of the Japanese. The extreme courtesy of the Japanese forbids all disturbing interference in their private lives. Even to send an announcement requires the authorization of the receiver. Reception was sympathetic, sometimes even enthusiastic. Japan had been dying of spiritual emptiness due to the abandonment of her ancestral faith for an unbridled, atheistic nationalism imported from foreign shores. The disease was spreading, especially in intellectual circles. With his usual perspicacity, Father Maximilian immediately touched the nerve center. The hunger of these souls had to be satisfied, the uneasiness of these hearts called for a doctor. This was the hour for the missionary. What an abundant harvest awaits us, he cried, if we Christians only live our faith. Words do not impress them, but example does. Contacts were set up, no one knows how. The little group of Polish friars, so absolutely disinterested and so happy hide their extreme destitution, intrigued, moved, attracted the Japanese. The little review, so humble and so rich in substance, did the rest. The Immaculata served as a magnet. These pagans respected her and learned to love her. The example of these foreigners, who were entirely and passionately devoted to her service, was truly too contagious. Very fine observers, the Japanese tried to trace such great heroism back to its source. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. We have before us a photograph inscribed, Father Maximilian among the bonzes. His emaciated and smiling face emerges from the midst of a group with inscrutable features. Was it curiosity that had brought them, or rather the irresistible attraction of sanctity? The priests spent long hours explaining to them the truths of Christianity. One of them declared one day that in the future he would admit no one into this bonzery who would not love the Sibo no Kishi. Scarcely 2 months after his arrival in Japan, on June 25, 1930, Father Maximilian was summoned to the provincial chapter, which was to be held at Lwów. Obedient as always, he left, but his heart was heavy because there was no one capable of maintaining the gigantic work in his absence. At the chapter, the very future of the Japanese Niepokalanów was put to question. The expenses were heavy, and the capitular fathers discussed the prudence of undertaking such a foolish venture. Father Maximilian followed his usual tactics. Having explained all his arguments and spoken from the abundance of his heart with that communicative flame which was uniquely his, he remained silent, waited, closed his eyes, and, with that well-known gesture, hid his hands under his capuche. In his little watch pocket he held his rosary, and very slowly, while his superiors discussed the business, while the fate of his Japanese mission was at stake, he summoned his council, reciting innumerable Hail Marys. I did all I could, and now it is certainly your turn, Immaculate Mother. He won on all scores and returned to Japan with full power. This time, he traveled through the continent, crossing Siberia. He was greatly upset by his experiences in this immense country from which God is officially banished. Naturally, he traveled third class with the poorest people. At each large station during the interminable journey, there was a rush toward the hot water spigot, the famous kipiatok, which was provided for making tea, the only warm beverage available. In the motley group within the overpacked compartments, it was easy to observe people and even to obtain certain confidences. There was a long stop at Moscow. Did Father Maximilian go to see the dark and tragic mausoleum that encloses the remains of one of the greatest prophets of the new religion? Did he hold a private interview with Lenin? We would like to see him, humble, small, insignificant, with his hands under his capuche praying for the repose of the soul of this great man with the bitter smile, whose sarcophagus in the midst of scarlet draperies seems surrounded with flames. Russia had haunted him for years. When he was at the sanatorium lying for interminable hours on his couch, he studied Russian. Since then, he had always tried to keep abreast with the atheistic literature published in Russia. He stored it at home in a locked chest. The great dream of his life was to publish his review in Russian. Toward the end of his life, shortly before the war, he made a prediction. One day, you will see the statue of the Immaculata in the center of Moscow atop the Kremlin. A great many witnesses heard these words, spoken with an accent of tranquil certainty, but only one, Father Pignalbirai, one of the 7 founders, gathered this confidence. Before this takes place, we must pass through a trial of blood. When he returned to Japan on August 24, he surveyed with broken heart the ravages caused by his absence. The mission was on the verge of bankruptcy. For 1 month the review had not been published and it seemed unlikely to appear. His presence saved everything, and the work even assumed a new scope. At the provincial chapter he had just obtained authorization to found a Japanese branch establishment from Niepokalanów and to open a novitiate for the natives. The problem was to build a house as soon as possible. Father Maximilian bought land in the outskirts of Nagasaki, on a steep slope which goes down a long ridge in the opposite direction from the city. Everyone criticized him. Had anyone ever thought of building under such conditions? Why turn your back to the city? The priest smiled but remained unconvinced. May 16, 1931 he opened his Japanese Niepokalanów. After the cataclysm of the atomic bomb, Mugenze no Sono translated the Garden of the Immaculata remained almost intact, because it was protected by the ridge. Only the window panes were blown out, no one was killed in the precincts of the friary. Then, and only then, did they understand. The original structure of Mugenze no Sono was, of course, built by the friars themselves. This was a difficult stage. Father Maximilian had hardly any co-workers of his own stature and enthusiasm, or of his spirit of abnegation. Many became discouraged. Many grew homesick and asked to return to Poland. Many were very willing to be missionaries, but elsewhere. We must admit that Father Maximilian did wonders, but nothing came easily to him, and each day of his life was a testing crucible for his faith. Most of the time he was hoping against hope. The heart-rending correspondence of these years says a great deal. Herein he reports to his provincial, in the name of holy obedience and without the shadow of bitterness, the denials, the treasons, the cowardice of unfaithful brothers. Fortunately, there were very many who remained faithful. The works of God exhibit a wonderful process of selection. For every one who deserted in discouragement, 2 others climbed to the front. Opposed to so much cowardice was the silent barrage of sheer heroism. In spite of all difficulties, the house was built, the printing increased, and the dear pagans came in ever-increasing numbers seeking light and joy. Some of the Japanese wrote touching letters. Perhaps in the future someone will publish this correspondence, which reveals the deep nostalgia of the Japanese soul completely open to the message of Christ. Thank you for sending me the Kishi no Sono. I read it with joy, writes Ina Hahamamo. Thank you also for your kind letter. I have been sick for some time. But since my friend, who subscribes to your review, spoke to me of the Catholic religion, I have forgotten my own sufferings. It is a great joy, writes N. Masako, that all of you over there at Mugenze no Sono work for the glory of God and propagate love for the Immaculata. I am not yet baptized, because my father and mother are opposed to it. Some time ago, I went to Hokkaido, where I met a friend, Kanatsu, who was a member of the MI and a reader of the review. I came to know that noble soul, and the priest at Osaka appreciated him very much also. 1 year has passed since I came back from Osaka. In February of 1933, Kanatsu died. His preparation for death was very beautiful. I admired his trust in God and the Immaculata. When he knew he was going to die, realizing that he would be unable to receive either Holy Viaticum or extreme unction in his home, he dragged himself to the church, and there the last rites were administered. Not everyone would be capable of such courage. During his last agony, neither his father nor his mother was with him, only the priest and the hospital nurse. Kanatsu loved the Blessed Virgin very much and often asked her to intercede for him. He often urged me also to love her, and he never grew tired of repeating to me, "Pray to the Immaculata. Pray to the Immaculata. Pray to the Immaculata." Then I tried to follow his instructions, and I exhorted others to do the same thing. If you had not come to Japan, another declared, I, Amaki, would still be a pagan. And here is a gratifying story of conversion. One day, by chance, an issue of your review fell into my hands, and I read the story of the nun who works at Madagascar among the lepers. An American who visiting the hospital said to her, "I would not like to work here, even if they paid me $20,000. And I, answered the nun, I would not do it for even $100,000, because I work only for love of the good Lord." This story impressed me, and I began to think. Since that time, I have received your review regularly. In reading it carefully, I learned that if man has sinned and if he repents of his sin and asks the good Lord for forgiveness through the intercession of the Immaculata, the Lord then forgives him. I used to think that it was sufficient to have killed no one high order to avoid going to hell, but I see now from reading the Night of the Immaculata that this is not enough. We must have faith and pray. Little by little, I instructed myself by reading your review. In October last year, I was baptized and they named me Teresa. And now I have the joy of being a child of God. In short, the Kishi no Sono served as a course in Christian doctrine, adorned with examples and stories. Its extraordinarily wide circulation, which quickly exceeded the record of former printings, proved the Immaculata to be a sovereignly effective master key. 2 years after the foundation in Japan in 1930, Father Maximilian embarked to establish a new Niepokalanów in India. He was exhausted and had attacks of fever, but paid no attention to the state of his health. Had not experience taught him that the works of God are done only on the cross? I believe, he writes during this voyage, that the Blessed Virgin gives each one of us the graces necessary to carry out her plans. Therefore, but my pen must not carry me too far. I believe that a local Niepokalanów is to spring up in every country to enable the Immaculata to radiate on every region, using all the productions of modern technical science. We must move quickly. There is no time to lose. Landing at Singapore, Father Maximilian once again took up the project of a Malayan review and very discreetly prepared the groundwork. Having arrived in India, he went to Ernakulam, the residence of the Catholic Archbishop. He was received coldly and with suspicion. What could this stranger want? The priest turned to prayer and called upon Saint Therese of Lisieux. Had he not agreed with her long ago in Rome that he would pray each day for her canonization if, in return, she would be the patroness of his work? Standing before her statue in a corridor of the archbishopric, he spoke to his little saint. "Let us see, little sister, if you remember. At that moment," he writes, "a flower fell at my feet, it was like a rose. Very simply it had detached itself from a vase of flowers at the foot of the statue. This made a definite impression on me and I thought, we will see what that signifies." All the correspondence of Father Maximilian is written with this transparent simplicity. He spoke as he wrote, expressing very precisely all he thought. This brought him some enemies and much misunderstanding. He had the soul of a child, incapable of rancor or bitterness. The supernatural was his habitual climate to such a point that he was disconcerting. One could not grow accustomed to his way of talking about saints and especially about the Blessed Virgin, for he referred to them as living persons with whom he familiarly associated. This great realist was not of this earth, and perhaps that is the reason he had such a quality of leadership among human beings in their activities. Little Saint Therese kept her bargain. All the difficulties with the ecclesiastical authorities in India cleared away as if by a miracle, and the Archbishop of Ernakulam wrote to the General of the Order, officially inviting the Polish missionaries. Unfortunately, preparations were toilsome and Father Maximilian was not there to hasten them. The friars delayed at the sight of the clouds piling on the horizon. War came, and to this day the Polish Franciscans have not again taken up the gauntlet or the rose that the little Therese had offered to her brother missionary with such a charming gesture. But the work has only been delayed, for now from the height of heaven they are co-workers, using both hands for their missionaries. Father Maximilian had worked too hard and his health suffered serious effects. On May 23, 1936, he left for Poland, where, at the provincial chapter, he was elected guardian of Niepokalanów in Poland. In spite of all, this was a blow to him. His heart remained with his dear pagans, and he hoped so much that he would one day find his desired martyrdom over there. He did not discuss it, however. This was surely the time for heroic obedience. Through the lips of his superiors, the Immaculata had spoken. If he did not understand, so much the better. It was sufficient for him to serve blindly, with all his heart. Father Maximilian, set your mind at ease. More challenging combats await you. Part 6. Chapter 13, Preparing for the Trial of Blood. The price of death is a lifetime. After Father Maximilian's return to Poland, a new note was struck in his conferences and writings, the premonition of approaching catastrophe and of his own death. He had to make the most of the precious time yet left to him. He outdid himself, he was in a hurry. He must save every minute as a miser saves a penny. During the 3 years preceding the war, all his works took a dizzy swing. On December 8, the year of his return, he announced the general rules of Niepokalanów designed to bring about even greater order and efficiency. In 1937 he initiated the first 5-year plan of apostolic work. In 1938 the Small Night and the Little Night began publication for young people and children. The little journal was issued in 11 daily editions. On December 8 he opened SP3RN Polish Station 3 Radio Niepokalanów. The same year he began Miles Immaculati, the Latin quarterly for priests. In May 1939 he went to Lithuania to take preliminary steps for establishing a Lithuanian Niepokalanów in Linkiewicz. He sent a delegation to Belgium for the same reason. Petitions were coming in from southeastern Europe, Brazil, and elsewhere asking him to establish new Niepokalanóws there. The membership in the MI approached 1 million members. And yet in the midst of all this Father Maximilian emphasized with insistence as never before the supremacy of the spiritual. He wanted to put his dear little children on guard against the smoke screen of material success, which is nothing and which does not count if it is not on a par with a superabundant inner life. This was the secret of his wonderful success. A formidable realist and businessman beyond compare, a marvel to the best technicians, Father Maximilian never permitted himself to be caught in the trap of efficiency, of statistics and figures. This man, who did not allow himself a minute's rest, defended jealously the inalienable rights of God to our time, and in offering it to him he wished to offer also its best fruits. At Niepokalanów, the atmosphere of prayer and silence strikes the visitor much more forcibly than the powerful presses and the impressive output of this industrial city. One can feel there that at every instant activity is elevated and consecrated by a spirit of love. These workmen are destined to sing with their machines and their tools the praises of the Lord God and of His very dear Mother. The whole enterprise is a liturgy. It is not quantity that counts, but quality. Father Maximilian never failed to insist on this point. Once he wanted to tempt his humble followers and asked, "And now what shall we do?" It was his habit to ask their advice, for this incomparable leader was nothing of a dictator and knew very well that real obedience sanctifies liberty but does not crush it. One of the friars answered in the heat of excitement, "Double the output." Another added, "We will double the output if each one perfects himself." Exactly. Father Maximilian exclaimed with pleasure. "You have hit the point. If our quality is improved, the quantity will come in addition." On another occasion the friars questioned him. "Tell us, Father, in what does the true progress of Niepokalanów consist?" He spoke energetically in response. "Certainly, it is not the expansion of the property that will be a proof of progress, nor new and vast buildings. If we get the latest models of machines, if we make use of all technical improvements and all the discoveries of modern science, it still will not be real progress. If our reviews double and even triple their circulation, that still will not prove real progress. Then, what must we have for making progress? Fundamentally, Niepokalanów is not so much our visible and exterior activity, be it inside the cloister or outside the cloister. The real Niepokalanów is our souls. All the rest, even skill, is secondary. Progress is spiritual, or it is not progress at all. Therefore, even though it were necessary to suspend our work, even though all members of the militia abandoned us, even though we had to be dispersed as leaves swept by the autumn wind, we would say, my brothers, that we are truly progressing if the ideal of Niepokalanów continues to shine in our souls. As I write these lines, I receive the news that the printing establishment of Niepokalanów has finally undergone nationalization. This means simply the confiscation and transportation of the machinery. Most certainly, one should avoid using the term religious persecution. In Poland, as in Hungary and all the other countries behind the Iron Curtain, one refers to these things as progress, or as the struggle against the reactionary spirit in the name of true democracy. Now the sons of Father Maximilian will have to meditate with deeper fervor and better understanding upon the passage quoted above and upon so many others which develop the same thought with the insistence of the Old Testament prophets. Long before this time, but especially since his return from Japan, Father Maximilian predicted violent persecution. It is noteworthy that he envisioned persecution not only as a trial but also as a chastisement for our own sins of omission. In an article written in Latin while he was in Nagasaki, we read a passage which deserves careful reflection: Portet studere, in simul motus anti-religiosos nostri itatis, fontes eorum, methodos, affectus etc. distinguendo in talibus motivus quid mali, continient, quia non est alias efficacier modus ad malum modum extinguendum, quam cognoscere quid boni continient et applicare statum hoc bonum in causam nostrum. Omissiones circa hoc produxerunt deplorados events in Mexico et Hispania. I would post this text in every center of Catholic action. Here is the translation. We must study the anti-religious movements of our time, their sources, methods, results, and so forth. We must, above all, discern what is good in them and what is bad, for there is no more effective way to fight and conquer an evil movement than to recognize the portion of good that it contains and to apply it immediately to our own cause. Failure in this regard has brought about deplorable consequences in Mexico and in Spain. We will pass over the awkward and unskillful Latin. All our seminaries, I fear, have the regrettable habit of butchering Cicero, a torture sufficient to constitute his purgatory. And San Teodoro was no exception. Let us, then, ignore the verbal form and fix our minds upon the thought which is so resplendently profound and true. In writing these lines, Father Maximilian touched the most acute point of the great evil of our time. Why have we not known how to save in time the golden grain of truth stolen by the father of lies? Why have we not known how to restore it to the barns of the Father of Heaven? This is one confession which is not always pleasant to hear and still less pleasant to make, for we much prefer to assume the role of victim and martyr than that of responsible agent. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. How can we reach our highest excellence? Simply by becoming saints. On this point, Father Maximilian was uncompromising. I demand that you become saints, and very great saints. But look here, Father, do you not ask too much? Why, no, he answered. Sanctity is not a luxury, but a simple duty. It is one of Christ's first principles, be ye perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. I will show you that it is not difficult. Have you a piece of chalk? Speechless, they stared at him. Father Maximilian smiled and continued. It is a question of simple calculation. In a second, I shall put the formula for sanctity on the blackboard for you. You will see how simple it is. Calm and grave, he wrote on the blackboard before 3 young listeners, V equals V. Here is my formula. Do you understand it? The small v is my will, the capital V is the will of God. When opposed, they cross like this, plus, then there is the cross. If you want to cancel out that cross, unite your will and the will of God, who wants you to become saints. It is so simple, the one requisite is to obey. I remarked at the very beginning of this book that saints are inconvenient to live with and that we should pity the poor sand crabs who race with the eagles. The little formula of Father Maximilian, which he called so simple and for years applied with the ease of a game, is really the quintessence of the greatest books on spirituality and the supreme stake of the whole inner life. The greatest saints alone have succeeded in cancelling out the cross and consenting to the most radical renunciation of self. Saint John of the Cross would have delighted in reading these words of Father Maximilian. We see at a glance that he has not said everything, but we can easily fill in the gap. It is all so simple, because we belong to the Immaculata, absolutely, unconditionally. Our sanctification is her business and, I would dare say, her specialty. Is she not the mother of Christ, both head and members? Then, whoever accedes to her rights over us consents at the same time to the divine invasion, as in those ancient formularies of baptism wherein the catechumen responded, Consentio tibi, Christ, I surrender to you. Consequently, there will be a direct proportion between the number of souls entirely devoted to the service of the Immaculata and the number of truly heroic saints. On this point, Father Maximilian declares, there is not one single heroic act that we are unable to accomplish with the help of the Immaculata. In the same conference, he adds, we must show by very splendid example how to sacrifice ourselves without limits for her. This life is brief, like misers we must take advantage of the little time that remains to us. What will be the criterion of our perfection? To do all things as she would have done them in our place, and especially to love God as she loves Him, with her own heart. Indeed, these are things that one cannot learn in books. Father Maximilian does not cease to remind us of this fact. These things are learned only on one's knees. He preached much more by example than by words. His life was a continual prayer. How I regret that I am unable to quote all the Fioriti which I have at hand, with just a trace of their faint and delightful freshness as they come from the rather inexpert hand of some friar who records them. When there was something important to undertake and a foreman of a section would come to ask his advice, both of them would first kneel down in front of the desk where the Immaculata presided, and only after that would they consider the technical question. One day, when the exasperating campaign against the little journal was at its height and malicious reports were falling thick, the editor-in-chief of the newspaper sent a friar to Father Maximilian for an article answering the accusations. A moment later he sent the friar back with a written message that amazed the others: "Let us be led by the Immaculata, let her do what she wants. Gently, my sons, gently, we could bungle everything by acting too hastily." When they were undertaking a publicity campaign, he repeatedly endlessly, "Remember, my brothers, that the point is not at all to win subscribers, but to win souls." At the beginning of each new publication, his adversaries would make the most somber predictions, for instance, that the whole idea was so contrary to common sense that the magazine could not possibly succeed. But they had to surrender in face of the facts. A Polish Franciscan father explained the fabulous and unforeseen success in this manner: "You can't help it. Before sending off a number, Father Maximilian wraps it so well with prayers that it runs smoothly by itself." Aware that the end of his life was approaching, Father Maximilian wanted to leave his beloved sons his testament. One day during the octave of the Epiphany, according to an old Polish custom, the friars at Niepokalanów were staging one of the traditional mystery plays of the Nativity, the famous Jezulka. After the evening meal, Father Maximilian made an announcement: "Those of you who wish may stay behind with me." "I wanted very much to go see the Jezulka," the brother chronicler confides to us, "but even so I stayed." The little group surrounded the priest. "Be seated close to me, my sons." In his voice and on his face there was a certain solemnity commingled with a great sweetness. "My dear brothers, for the present I am still with you. You love me and I love you in return. However, you must realize that I will not be here always. I will die, and you will stay. Before departing, I would like to leave you something." Desiring to do only what the Immaculata wants, I said that only those who wished it should stay behind in order that she herself might choose you. You call me Father Guardian, and you do right, because I am so. You call me Father Director, and that is correct, because I am the director of these publications. And so I am Father Guardian, Director, Superior. But what am I really? I am your father, really and truly, even more than your carnal fathers. For through the Father of the body God gave you physical life, but from me you have received the spiritual life, the divine life, your religious vocation. Is that not so? Oh yes, Father, undoubtedly. Without you, without the night, without Niepokalanów, we would not be in the order. And each one in turn started to recall the beginning of his vocation and what he owed to Father Maximilian. He listened to them with a smile. Therefore, I am really your father. Moreover, this is the reason I use familiar, intimate terms when I speak to you, for you are my children. There was a moment of silence. Father Maximilian held his hands as usual under his capuche, as if he were hiding there some wonderful surprise. Then he began to speak again very shyly. "My children, you are well aware that I am very much older than you and that I will not always be here. That is why I would like to leave you something, to tell you something. May I do so?" "By all means, Father. Tell us." And they crowded closer around him. Visibly moved with emotion, Father Maximilian went on. "If you knew, my dear brothers, how happy I am. My heart overflows with happiness and peace, as much as one is able to be happy on this earth. In spite of the troubles and anxieties of daily life, somewhere, at the bottom of my heart, there is always this peace, this joy that cannot be expressed in human words." He was silent for a moment, and then he continued in a very low voice. "My brothers, love the Immaculata, love the Immaculata. She will make you happy. Give her your confidence, give yourself to her totally, without limits. Not everyone is privileged to understand the Immaculata, it is given only to those who ask for this grace on bended knee. The Immaculata is the Mother of God. Do you understand what it means to say Mother of God? Really, truly Mother of God. Only the Holy Spirit is able to make known his spouse to whomever and however he wills. I would like to tell you one more thing, but I think this is enough." According to the friar who tells this incident, Father Maximilian gazed at them as though he feared something. The friars earnestly begged him to speak and to keep nothing from them. "I told you, my brothers, that I am very happy and that my soul is flooded with joy. Do you know why? Because heaven has been promised to me in all certitude. My sons, love the Immaculata, love the Immaculata, love the Immaculata." He spoke with such emotion that tears sprang to his eyes and ran freely down his cheeks. There followed a momentary silence that no one except Father Maximilian dared to break. "There it is, brothers. That will be sufficient for you." Their entreaties were touching. "Speak, Father, perhaps we will never have a similar occasion, nor an opportunity like this." After a moment's hesitation, he spoke a few words more. "Since you ask me with such insistence, I will tell you one more thing. This happened in Japan. Now, I will tell you nothing more, so do not question me further." The friars coaxed him in vain to uncover a little more of his secret, but Father Maximilian kept silent, plunged in deep meditation. When they had regained their composure, he spoke very paternally. "I have disclosed my secret to you in order that it might be a strength and a support in the tests that are ahead of you. There will be sufferings, temptations, perhaps you will be haunted by discouragement. Remember then what I have told you and learn to be ready for the greatest sacrifices, ready for all that the Immaculata will ask of you. My sons, do not desire extraordinary things, but simply to perform the will of the Immaculata, which is the will of God." Before rising to leave, he added, "You must tell no one what I have just confided to you. As long as I live, say nothing to anyone." There was so much insistence in his voice that each brother promised. It was in Japan. "Heaven is promised to me in all certitude. I am so happy, my heart overflows with peace and joy. Father Maximilian, you have not said so much since the day your mother wrested from you the secret of the 2 crowns. This evening's confidence completes the one given in the morning of your life. One would be a very poor psychologist not to understand what you have so clearly unveiled. She herself, the faithful Virgin, must have told you this, so that, humble as you are, you would be convinced of your final perseverance. And was not the rest of the secret, which you would not reveal, a confirmation of the promise of martyrdom? I believe that even the friars who were privileged witnesses did not at first understand the full import of your astonishing revelation. they will understand only little by little, and later. As catastrophe veered closer, his exhortations became more and more insistent, his allusions more and more obvious. When, at the beginning of 1938, Father Maximilian spoke of war as certain and quite imminent, no one in Europe cared to believe it. He wanted to prepare his brothers, to inure them to the hardships of war. The whole gist of his conferences was such: whatever may happen, all will be for our good, because our condition is such that no one nor anything can do us harm. Exterior and interior sufferings can serve only to sanctify us. Are we not ready to suffer anything for the Immaculata? Suppose they kill us, that will be free passage to heaven. We should even thank our executioners and show our thanks from heaven by obtaining from the Immaculata the grace of their conversion. In short, we are invincible. And would it not be the supreme honor if we could seal our faith with our blood? Receive as payment for our faithful service a bullet straight to the heart? What a dream! And what happiness to be able to die with the certitude that we have suffered much and worked much for her. Sometimes he was even more explicit. His words spoken in March 1938 were taken down verbatim in shorthand by one of the friars. I want you to know, my brothers, that an atrocious conflict is brewing. We do not know yet what will develop. In our beloved Poland we must expect the worst. During the first 3 centuries, the Church was persecuted. The blood of martyrs watered the seeds of Christianity. Later, when the persecutions ceased, one of the fathers of the Church deplored the lukewarmness of Christians. He rejoiced when persecution returned. In the same way, we must rejoice in what will happen, for in the midst of trials our zeal will become more ardent. Besides, are we not in the hands of the Blessed Virgin? Is not our most ardently desired ideal to give our lives for her? We live only once. We die only once. Therefore, let it be according to her good pleasure. One day just before the war, while speaking of the 3 stages of the spiritual life preparation for the apostolate, the Passion, he said, "As for me, it is only now that I pass to the 3rd stage." Where? How? It is she who knows. What happiness it is to die as a soldier and not as a simple gentleman, not in bed, but on a post of execution, with a bullet right in the heart, to seal our love for the Immaculata with our blood, to pour out the last drop in order to hasten the conquest of the whole world for Christ, through her. That is what I wish for you, my sons, and what I wish for myself. The harvest is ripe. Let the reaper come, for executioners are necessary to make a martyr. In order to have bread, we must cut the wheat. ******. Chapter 14, The Trial of Blood begins. In September 1939, the Blitzkrieg struck Poland. Squadrons of Junkers flashed through the sky like gigantic vultures. Bombardments followed endlessly, one after another, night and day. Villages, hamlets, whole cities flared like torches at the 4 points of the horizon. The sky, streaked with purple and scarlet, resembled a racetrack where the horsemen of the apocalypse gallop their steeds. The Polish troops fought fiercely to hold the front lines, which cracked on all sides, but they were overwhelmed, encircled, compelled to save, no longer a Poland in sore distress, but the very honor of their country. There were deeds worthy of the Thermopolites, but all in vain. Each new communique announced another mass retreat. Then came a period of silence. Warsaw, the indomitable, still defended itself without hope, amid universal admiration and universal inertia. The war was lost, and for the soldiers who still fought guerrilla warfare in the forests the only choice was between death and capture. Very many preferred death. The outrageously humiliated country awoke from its death-like stupor. The ruins continued to smolder, the battlefields resembled charnel houses. Arrogant and well-disciplined by an inhuman mystique, the enemy applied methodically, point by point, his plan of extermination. Defeat no longer meant being the captive who groans under the heel of the conqueror, but the condemned who is led to execution by the tyrant. In order that the master race, Herrenvolk, hold sway, the slave must serve or die. Then, throughout the land there was an immense surge of hatred which went to the head like strong wine. The war was lost but not finished. In the forest underground, the first centers of the resistance group were organized. Everyone, men, women, and children, took part in the struggle. However, the weapons were different, and therefore it was difficult to find volunteers. It is so very easy to become intoxicated with hatred, which is like a glass of brandy given to soldiers before attacking with fixed bayonets. Brandy stimulates but does not nourish. A friend of mine who died a war casualty wrote me one day, "I hate Germans because they taught me how to hate." What a painful confession. To make it, one must have great loyalty and strength of soul. Most of them had no scruples, for hatred seemed just, normal, necessary. At that time, who dared recall the law of perfect charity that covers with its royal mantle even the tyrannical enemy? Forgiving would have seemed shameful. The perversion of the very virtues of Christianity was the greatest crime of the war. Only the saints resist its poison. But we are not saints, only poor sinners, who, when slapped on the right cheek, instead of turning the left, return the slap with a resounding blow. In the process of Joan of Arc's canonization, special commendation was given the fact that the Maid of Orleans, who knew how to fight and conquer on the field of battle, considered it by far the most difficult of all her grand victories that she never knew hatred. The hero of our story, in whose veins ran soldiers' blood, resembled her on this point. Father Maximilian did not know hatred. To live in an atmosphere of hatred and not to be contaminated by that hatred is as miraculous as raising the dead to life. One would need to have lived in the brutally battered Poland of those times, to have been humiliated at every turn, and touched to the quick in matters of human dignity and most sacred rights in order to comprehend the full meaning of such a statement. To forgive tyrants while pinned to the cross, one has to be either Christ himself or else entirely emptied of self through him. It is no longer I that live, but Christ lives in me. Galatians 2:20, it is completely above and beyond human power. If we have not believed his words, let us now look at the works of this extraordinary man. Father Maximilian had a soldier's blood and he therefore waged war. His lady's war. And he cast on the scales more than his life. From the beginning, Niepokalanów was violently bombarded. Seeing the situation grow graver from hour to hour, Father Maximilian called the brothers together and told them that they could in fact, must take refuge with their families, where they would be in less danger. He allowed those who seemed best conditioned to war to stay, for they had begged to remain with him. As for the others, he dismissed them as a father does his children. He blessed them and watched them depart one by one. Remaining with the little flock, his preferred ones, his staff, he exhorted them to renew their act of unconditional consecration, surrendering to the Immaculata their life and their death. Then he gave them the general absolution and held out a small indulgenced cross for each one to kiss. Bombardments followed in rapid succession, especially at night. The brothers stayed in the bomb shelters, but Father Maximilian scarcely ever went down. It seemed, one of them said, that he did not know fear. All noticed his composure, his even temper, his fearlessness. He thought only of his sons. Later on, when they returned to the dormitories, he would often go to see them at night, to be sure they were all there, no one missing. Even before the war, they were accustomed to these nightly rounds and wondered how he could live with so little sleep. On September 19, the first German motorcycles appeared. Some SS men came to the door of the friary and one of THSM barked, "Alaram!" The assembled friars were ordered to vacate the premises immediately. To attend the infirmary, where there were a number of wounded, 2 were to stay, the brother infirmarian, and who will the other be? "Father, stay," cried a pleading voice. "No, my child," he answered gently, "Brother Syracuse will be more useful." And the priest left with the group. On the way, some women watching them pass by under convoy began to weep. "Do not speak to them," Father Maximilian cautioned, in order not to grieve them more and expose them to reprisals. He took advantage of the first halt to speak to the friars. "Courage, my sons. Do you not see that we are leaving on a mission? They pay our fare in the bargain. What a piece of good luck! The thing to do now is to pray well in order to win as many souls as possible. Let us, then, tell the Blessed Virgin that we are content, and that she can do with us anything she wishes." The Nazis crammed them into trucks, then into livestock wagons. On September 21, they landed at the camp of Auschwitz. It was not yet a concentration camp with all its horror, but it was sufficiently like one to try the most courageous. Ill treatment, taunts of all sorts, painful lack of privacy, hunger, and cold. Very soon the little brothers began to wonder how long they could hold out. Father Maximilian, ill himself and much more exhausted than the others, revived them, encouraged them, made them pray and laugh. Incomparable leader, he knew well that sometimes a witty remark is as good as a piece of bread. He distributed peace and joy liberally, his presence itself was a balm. The Germans were perplexed by this sickly Franciscan who smiled at them and graciously offered them, of all things, medals. They wondered if he was ridiculing them. No, they had only to look at him to be sure. But then? Almost against their wills they softened. Then came his greatest victory. The German administrator's wife, touched by some gracious trait of the priest, sent him a personal gift, a handsome cake. Father Maximilian, of course, gathered together all the brothers and directed them to cut it into equal parts. Each was given a very thin symbolic slice. At another time, he received a little cream cheese. Lacking plates, he portioned out a teaspoonful into the cupped hand of each brother. On his feast day, October 12th, the brothers extended their good wishes, and Father Maximilian made a little speech. "This morning I asked myself what I should give you for my feast. Well, here it is. I want you to belong even more to the Blessed Virgin, each day more profoundly. When suffering is far away, we feel that we are ready for everything. Now that we have the occasion to suffer, let us take advantage of it to gain souls. Let us try. Let us try to win as many souls as possible for the cause of the Immaculata." The prisoners had not been permitted to bring spare clothing. The filth of the barracks was repulsive. It was eaten up with vermin. But even in these unhallowed surroundings, the brothers who woke during the night often saw the thin silhouette of Father Maximilian kneeling on his bed of straw. When the priest saw that more and more of the civilian prisoners in the camp were dying, he said to his friars, "Let us make a bargain with the Blessed Virgin. Let us say to her, 'Sweetest Mother, through love I resign myself to remain in this revolting camp, provided the others are permitted to go home. I will remain here to suffer forgotten, despised, alone. I give myself to you to die on this filthy pallet, surrounded by completely insensible and cold hearts.'" If his little flock repeated these words from the tips of their tongues without completely understanding them, he, however, knew well what he was asking. In spite of all the privations and nagging, the camp of Auschwitz was not a concentration hell. They were hungry, but not dying from hunger. and the friars from Niepokalanów could even observe their rule, to a certain extent. Father Maximilian often gave them religious conferences. One day he talked to them of Lourdes, of La Salette, and the Blessed Virgin's repeated appeal for penance. We live in a time of great penance. Let us at least know how to profit by it. Suffering is good and sweet to him who accepts it willingly. He must surely have realized that not all of his sons were mature enough for martyrdom. What occurred during his long, silent meditations on the reeking and verminous straw of his bed? One day he announced to the friars, "Courage, my children. Our mission is coming to an end. Let us learn how to profit from these last days." I have before me several testimonies from his fellow prisoners. How I would like to quote them in their entirety. All insist on his heroic and untiring charity. The unpolished style of these accounts makes them all the more touching. Here is a sample, related by Brother Jurasek. For a while, my bed was beside his. I awoke during the night once, suddenly aware that someone was very gently tucking in my feet. I opened my eyes, and what did I see? It was Father Maximilian, who was covering my feet so tenderly. Every time I recall this incident, tears well up. He seemed to me then as infinitely good and tender as a mother. After this, I also noticed that he was secretly giving a large part of his ration of bread to a friar who suffered from hunger more than the rest of us. And our rations were so small that only one with a most loving heart would deprive himself of any part of them. Another writes, "I cannot find words to express what Father Maximilian was to us in those days of suffering, misery, and privation. We must thank the Blessed Virgin for them, because they were very precious moments for us." The prediction of Father Maximilian was fulfilled to the letter. They were liberated on the very feast of the Immaculate Conception. Had he prayed, as did Christ, that no one of those entrusted to him would be lost? All returned to Niepokalanów, which had been ransacked and plundered but not destroyed. Father Maximilian had no illusions, he was now merely waiting his turn. He did not wish to lose 1 minute of the precious time that was left for him. He started by introducing perpetual adoration, in order to increase his active forces of prayer. Day and night, the brothers succeeded each other before the modest altar. Never before had they prayed with so much fervor. Gradually they came back from exile. At this time they numbered 200 and soon reached 370. Unfortunately, many were sought by the Gestapo and could not return. The editorial staff was especially implicated and was forced to remain in hiding. Father Maximilian exerted limitless care to keep in touch with them by means of circular letters, which were priceless. He exhorted them not only to be patient but also to make new conquests. Because, he says, where a soul is perfectly consecrated to the Blessed Virgin, loving her with its whole heart, then it can only be that this perfect love will reflect on its environment, saving many souls. Therefore, these separated brothers should consider themselves on a mission and carry the ideal of Niepokalanów every place they go. Let us have no truce in our missionary work. Let us spread its influence in every heart. For that purpose let us offer all our troubles and all our sufferings. Let us desire only that the Immaculata be satisfied with us, let us try to make her happy at our expense, whatever the cost. How many souls will again find the light, thanks to your dispersion? Let us pray, accepting lovingly all crosses, and loving all our fellow men with no exception, friends and enemies. God is love. And as the effect must resemble the cause, all creation lives for love. Not only for the last end, but also for intermediate ends, and in all sound and normal action, love is the principal energy and the principal motive force. When he wrote these lines, did he have in mind the famous text of Dante, Colui che tutto move? The one who moves all things. Il Paradiso, XXIV, 131, his soul towered so transcendently above all contingent things that we find it difficult to follow him. But this contemplative was also an apostle and, therefore, a man of action. He would attempt the impossible and publish his beloved review under German domination. After endless red tape, he finally succeeded in obtaining the necessary authorization for a single issue, which appeared on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in 1940. In it Father Maximilian published his last article. He wrote, "If good consists in the love of God and in all that springs from love, evil in its substance is a negation of love. This is the real conflict. His ladies' war. Above and beyond armies locked in combat, above and beyond violent passions and mass slaughter and extermination camps, there are two implacable adversaries at the bottom of each human soul, good and evil, sin and love. And of what use are victories on the battlefield if within ourselves we suffer defeat?" Father Maximilian prepared himself for his supreme battle, a combat of love in the name of love and for the sake of love. The death camp proved him real. The Life of Father Maximilian Kolbe Part 7. In his final article Father Maximilian wrote, "No one in the world can alter the truth. All that we can do is to seek it, find it, and live it." Here he touched the crucial point. Does not the conflict that lacerates the modern world reduce itself to a crisis of truth? All reformers would like to change the truth, but the question is simply to recognize it as it is, serve it, and love it. No one in the world can alter the truth. These words sum up the testament of Father Maximilian. They ought to be written in flaming letters above the chapter of history which God is in process of writing straight and upright over the crooked lines of our treasons. Is not Satan's name the father of lies? Father Maximilian waited. He had known for a long time that he would not survive this war. Bloody war, so often foretold by him before countless witnesses, had actually come. He realized that the clash of arms expressed and disguised a far more serious struggle, one which rends the heart of man, that nest of vipers and whirlpool of light, that hidden source of all war. "Our wrestling is not against flesh and blood," exclaims St. Paul, Ephesians 6:12, "material forces are not the only powers with which we are at war." The Master had demonstrated the weapons of combat. Would the servant be greater than the Master? His passion continues. Father Maximilian once said, "The supreme abandonment of the agony was the crowning work of Jesus." With all his ardent soul this priest aspired toward the same triumph, and only God knows with what pacts and contracts he enlisted divine mercy. Like sublime lightning rods, the saints throw themselves between our sinful defilement and the demands of infinite sanctity. In order to untie the hands of love, they make themselves a prey to his justice. Let us not, then, look for the immediate cause of Father Maximilian's arrest, for much has been written on that subject, bewildering us with subtle conjectures. The Nazis did not trouble their consciences to justify their acts in Poland. In their methodical extermination, they followed one principal criterion: liquidate the select ones, the leaders. And Father Maximilian certainly belonged to that then preeminently undesirable class. His fate was decided in advance. On February 17, 1941, a black automobile stopped at the door of the friary. One of the brothers immediately recognized the insignia of the Gestapo and quickly ran to inform Father Maximilian, the guardian. "Is it true?" he questioned in a voice tinged with anxiety. But he quickly regained possession of himself. "All right, my son, I am going. Maria." And he went to meet them. They stood face to face, the frail religious with body wasted by illness and privations, and the 5 police officers, well-fed and in ruddy good health. "Praised be our Lord Jesus Christ." He addressed them politely, according to the Polish custom. They did not honor him with an answer. One of them snapped, "Are you Maximilian Kolbe?" "Yes, I am." "Then, follow us." He was arrested with 4 other priests, of whom only 2 survived. Before entering the black car that resembled a hearse, Father Maximilian gazed lovingly for the last time upon the domain of the Immaculata and his dear little flock now pitiably huddled together and inconsolable. In his heart he blessed them and said to the Blessed Virgin, "Since I am going away, you must take my place, dear Mother. Be the guardian of your domain, of all your sheep and all your lambs and even of the poor goats, if there are any. I give them all to you." The automobile drove away with Father Maximilian, who knew that he would never return. They were taken at first to Warsaw and committed to the terrible prison of Polaik, whose very name freezes the blood of the Poles in their veins. This was a period of horror, for the Germans were mopping up before the invasion of Russia. Thousands of Poles were shot each day. The number was so great that the condemned could not be counted. Father Maximilian found himself in cell 103. It did not take an hour for him to win every heart. He listened to the confidences of his prison mates, who were enfeebled by the atrocious tortures. He heard their confessions, prayed for them and with them, and treated them as a loving mother cares for her children. Then came inspection. At the sight of the priest's Franciscan habit, the SS group leader was seized with rage. With bloodshot eyes and foam at the lips, he seized the rosary that Father Maximilian wore on his cord and pulled it violently. "Imbecile, idiot, filthy priest, tell me if you believe in that." And he held up the crucifix of the rosary. "Yes, I believe," said Father Maximilian in a strong, calm voice. He was dealt a violent blow in the face. Then another. He doubled up with pain and felt the salty taste of blood in his mouth. "Well, do you still believe?" sneered the officer. "Oh, yes, I believe." Another blow. A shower of blows accompanied by oaths. The poor priest's face turned white, then purple. After each blow he arose again with increasing difficulty, but he continued to face his assailant. "And now will you tell me that you still believe?" "Yes, I do believe." The fury of the officer was unleashed. He struck with all his strength, with closed fists. Father Maximilian sank to the floor, and his tormentor kicked him about. His wild face no longer looked human. Finally, seeing that his victim did not move, he ran off, slamming the door. Father Maximilian scarcely regained consciousness before doing all he could to calm his companions. His face was horribly swollen. He spoke with great difficulty. "My friends, you ought to rejoice with me, it is for souls, for the Immaculata." The prison doctors took advantage of this incident to transfer Father Maximilian to the infirmary, where at least he was safe from further attack by the diabolical chief. Meanwhile, the friars at Niepokalanów lost no time. 20 brothers offered themselves as hostages to replace Father Maximilian. But the Nazis were tenacious of their prey, they refused. The priest could write to his brothers only very rarely and very briefly on postal cards that passed through a rigid censorship. Among the messages of practical nature, he wrote, "Send us handkerchiefs, and toothbrushes, a civilian suit and food packages addressed by our family names." In these messages he succeeded in inserting some clear and beautiful thoughts drawn from the very depths of his heart. The Immaculata, our most loving mother, has always surrounded us with tenderness and will watch us always. Why worry, my sons, since no evil can strike us unless God and the Immaculata know it and allow it. Let us be more and more completely led by her, wherever and in whatever may be her good pleasure, so that fulfilling our duty to the utmost we may through love save all souls. His last letter, dated May 12, concluded with these words. A few days later, he found himself on the list of the convoy destined for Auschwitz. They called it Death Camp, and the name was indeed well chosen. As Auschwitz, called Auschwitz by the Germans, more than 5 million condemned men met death after atrocious tortures. The scientifically organized crematories were smoking night and day, and a special commission was put in charge of expediting the operation. Each year marked greater progress in the methods of extermination. Whoever entered into this dark enclosure abandoned at the entrance all human hope. Much, perhaps too much, has been written about the concentration camps, but there remain pages that will never be written on this earth. Words skirt two equally indescribable gulfs, what is beyond and what is below man. Both surpass expression. For if there is a supernatural world above, there is also a supernatural one here below, and what escapes man's grasp in either sphere cannot be captured in human words. It is no wonder that those who have escaped from concentration camps disagree with what has been written about those camps. By way of comment, they will tell you that it was not exactly as it has been written. Their experience, personal, unique, does not coincide with that of others. The same hell has passed through the prism of different souls. Here again the profound adage proves itself: whatever is received according to the capacity of the receiver. It was the same hell, but how can we believe that in this black abyss certain souls may have contemplated stars if we ourselves have seen only the night black as pitch? It was the same hell, but some have known how to make it a springboard for magnificent spiritual ascents. If we do not understand, let us at least take it on faith. Some unfortunate ones died in revolt and hatred. The revolt was understandable, the hatred natural. There were involuntary martyrs, laborers of the 11th hour, whose souls suddenly expanded for the acceptance of sacrifice. But there were also conscious victims who made a business of this blood market, offering their own blood drop by drop in voluntary holocaust. Certainly far from being schools of sanctity, these atrocious prisons unchain the worst instincts, even in persons who believed themselves good. Not everyone was able to endure this supreme ordeal that required an entire life's novitiate to face it. Death does not improvise itself. We have witnessed lamentable downfalls and disgraces which in normal times one would never have believed possibly. Faith in the natural goodness of man was shattered. In this crucible souls were revealed for what they were: criminals, monsters, the vast majority of the mediocre, but also some saints. The latter were those men and women who consciously and willingly gave themselves in holocaust to perpetuate the cross by that act of highest freedom which espouses the divine will. Grace was not excluded from this hell, and who will dare to draw up the balance sheet of its victories? Hunger, ceaseless and gnawing hunger, tore the entrails and prevented sleep. Cold made one shiver night and day. There was no end to the tormenting. Incalculable crimes against human dignity were a part of a cleverly elaborated program. Before killing the victim, they had to crush it. Among these outcasts, priests were ranked next to last, just one category above that reserved for Jewish prisoners. They were commonly called priest swine, were given the hardest work, and regularly lashed with horsewhips. Humiliated, reduced to tatters, hunted out like beasts by a mysterious hatred, priest hatred, without willing it and even at times without knowing it, they gave witness. Their poor faces, swollen and unrecognizable, recalled the face of Christ covered with spittle. Father Maximilian willed it all. Father Maximilian understood. In this hell he was one of those rare souls who are supremely free, since, for a long time, there had been no division between his will and the will of God. Like Saint Andrew the Apostle, like the poor man of Assisi, he greeted the cross as his beautiful bride, O happy cross! And he prepared himself for the wedding feast. He belonged to the company called Babis, which was treated miserably and had for its superintendent Krot the Bloody. This monster vowed a merciless hatred for Father Maximilian. With his companions, the unfortunate priest had to carry large tree trunks at a quick trot, Laufschritt, and each time he fell exhausted under their weight, blows rained hard on his emaciated back. To his comrades, who in deep pity attempted to help him, his unvarying counsel was, "Do not expose yourselves or you will receive the same treatment. The Immaculata helps me. I will hold on." This veritable way of the cross lasted 2 weeks. One day, Krot spied him scarcely creeping along and seized the opportunity to amuse himself. He himself chose the largest tree trunks and loaded them on the shoulders of the priest with the order, "Run." Father Maximilian went a few steps, stumbled and collapsed. Then Krot assailed him and began with deliberate aim to kick him unmercifully in the stomach and then in the face. He howled, "You don't want to work, faker. Wait, I'll show you what work is." At mealtime he called out Father Maximilian and ordered him to stretch out on a pile of wood. Then the bulliest of his butchers laid on 50 lashes. Father Maximilian lay motionless, and Krot pushed him into a rut, covered him with dry branches and left him for dead. We owe all these details to an eyewitness, Father Sveta, one of the few survivors of Auschwitz. The companions of the poor priest clenched their fists but could do nothing. The least interference would only aggravate his case. It was only at night after work that they could bring him back, a mass of bloody tatters. The next day, at least, he was exempt from work. The hospital was a place of terror, where the sick died like flies 3 or 4 on the same bed, without medical care or anyone to attend to them. Father Maximilian chose the worst place, very near the door. In this way I see the dead carried out and I can pray for them. He was the admiration of all in the prison hospital, attendants as well as fellow prisoners. He repeatedly declared, "For Jesus Christ, I am ready to suffer much more. The Immaculata is with me. She helps me." One evening, the infirmarian secretly brought him a glass of tea, the greatest dream of those who burn with fever. To his astonishment, Father Maximilian flatly refused. "The others have none, and I would not like to be an exception." In spite of prohibitions and threats of punishment, he heard confessions all night long. As soon as it became dark, the sick crawled haltingly toward his bed and passed long moments there. A priest who later escaped relates that Father Maximilian clasped him on his heart as a mother does her child and whispered the sweet consolation, "Look to the Immaculata. She is the consolation of the afflicted. She loves us and listens to us. She helps all of us." Father Maximilian remained about 2 weeks in the hospital, then was transferred to the block of the invalids, who were exempt from work but received only half of the meager ration of the camp. Father Maximilian often gave his away, with the simple remark, "You are more hungry than I." One day, he confided to a young comrade who was doing his utmost to spare him, "No, my son, I will not serve the camp. But you and the other young ones, yes." In this hell, he was always even-tempered, always gay and full of spirit, cheering the downhearted, rebuking the defeatists. "My children, you must hold on. You must survive. Entrust yourselves to the Blessed Virgin. She will help you, she will save you." From time to time, he risked the lash and preached real sermons before an audience of skeletons and dying men. Those of his group who survived remember such a meeting one Sunday when he spoke of the relationship of the Immaculata to the 3 persons of the Holy Trinity with such burning enthusiasm that even the unbelievers were enraptured by it. Despite all the efforts of his friends, they could not keep him longer in the block of the invalids, and he was transferred to block 14, where the supreme test awaited him. ********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** Chapter 16, The sunset was red. With her I can do all things, love stronger than death. It was the end of July, 1941. In Block 14, the one where they kept Father Maximilian, a prisoner was missing. Another escape. The prisoners recalled with terror the threat of Fritsch, the chief officer, that for every fugitive 20 men of his block would be condemned to death by starvation. That night, no one in the barracks slept. A mortal fear seized these wretched men broken down by most refined torture, who often longed for death as a release. Death, yes. But not that death which is the most dreadful of all. To fall under the executioner's bullet, to die a soldier's death did not frighten these brave men. They could face the gallows without trembling. But to be in agony for days, dying by slow degrees amid inexpressible tortures that dry up the entrails, fill the veins with fire, lead to madness. Merely to think of these things froze their blood, and they felt themselves overwhelmed by indescribable terror. Throughout the camp, tales were told of the horrifying happenings in the block of death. Sometimes at night the bowlings of wild beasts resounded from this place of terror. Those condemned to starvation, they say, scarcely resembled human beings and even frightened the guards, for the agony consists not solely of hunger but of torments of thirst as well. During his famous hunger strikes, Gandhi drank liquids. Death from hunger, as long as one can drink, is not unbearable. It is the thirst that is inexpressible torture. Each of the prisoners asked himself, and what if it is I? These heroes of the resistance movement wept like little children. To a young boy trembling at his side, Father Maximilian whispered, "Are you afraid, my child? Don't be frightened. Death is nothing to be afraid of." The next morning at the roll call, the head of the camp announced that the fugitive had not been caught. He gave orders for all the blocks to break ranks, all but Block 14. They stood exposed to the burning sun. Hours passed. It was strictly forbidden to give them anything to drink. Some SS officers watched them and restored order by beating them with the butts of their guns. Every now and then, someone collapsed. When blows failed to stir the unconscious and insensible victims, the executioners dragged them out of the lines and piled them in heaps one on top of the other. The ghastly piles grew by the hour. The faces of those who survived were so swollen by the heat that they were unrecognizable. Father Maximilian, the sick man despaired of 20 times by the doctors, did not faint, did not fall. Like Mary at the foot of the cross, he remained standing. Had he not repeated 100 and 1,000 times, "With her, I can do all things"? Now was the time to prove it. Here was the moment to set the example. Under the relentless July sun his decision slowly ripened. He had given all. Since this life was no longer for him, was it not the moment to let it be taken? In the profound silence of his soul, in the peace of love at its apex, he listened. Hours passed. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the officer granted the prisoners a half-hour's rest and allowed them to eat some soup. For some, it was their last meal. Then they continued to stand at attention until evening, awaiting the sentence. The camp commandant, Fritsch, was fond of spectacular gestures. He prided himself on a remarkable sense of pedagogy. What an opportunity to give a lesson! Like an expert animal trainer, he awaited the proper moment. It was the evening roll call. The different blocks returning from work fell into line on the vast marching field. All eyes turned toward the heap of fellow prisoners already put to death. Countless lips moved in silent prayer, and an almost visible terror passed through the long lines. Commandant Fritsch circled slowly as he listened to the reports, then he suddenly halted in front of Block 14. His head resembled a bulldog's. He visibly delighted in the terror of his victims. There was such a silence that one could hear the buzz of a fly. Suddenly he began to speak, or rather bark. His staccato words cut the death-like silence one at a time. The fugitive has not been found. 10 of you will die for him in the starvation bunker. Next time, 20 will be condemned to death. He passed down the first line, looked them in the face, seemed to reflect a moment, then snapped in bad Polish, "Open your mouth. Put out your tongue. Show your teeth." The victim, gasping grotesquely, looked at him like a beast led to the slaughterhouse, while Fritsch appeared to be carefully inspecting his teeth. Was this a method of cruel mental torture, or a health test such as one sees in the horse market? Would he choose the strongest or the most feeble? In the German camps, the principle was to spare those in good health, but Fritsch was a sadist and followed only his caprices. He took enjoyment in passing among these shadows like an angel of death. At last, he raised his hand and pointed. "This one." Palitzk, his assistant, immediately wrote down the number on the list of the condemned. At Auschwitz a man was only a number. Pale as a winding sheet, the man stepped out of line. In the silence, the hiss of breathing sounded like a moan. Fritsch continued to choose. It amused him. This one. That one there. And that one. There were 10. 10 condemned to death. When falling out of line, one of them cried, "Oh, my poor wife, my poor children, whom I will never see again." Those remaining in the ranks breathed again. Only those who have been in a concentration camp know how fiercely one clings to life. At that particular moment, saving one's life consisted in escaping a most horrible death. Vice-Commandant Palitzk, the tool of Fritsch, yelped a new order. "Skuhiweg. Take off your shoes." A well-known ritual, those condemned to death go to the place of execution with bare feet. The clatter of wooden shoes thrown to the ground mingled with the sobbing of one of the victims, the same one who a moment ago had bewailed his wife and children. Links rum. Turn to the left. The host of prisoners watching this inhuman scene shuddered, for to the left was the ominous Block 13, with the black wall of execution, the gallows, and the starvation bunkers. Suddenly, something totally unexpected happened. A prisoner carved out a path through his dumbfounded comrades. He dared to leave the ranks. His head slightly bent to one side, he looked with his large eyes squarely into the face of the speechless Fritsch. A murmur spread like a wave breaking into foam. Word passed from line to line. "It is Father Maximilian. Father Kolbe." The camp commandant dug for his gun, stepped back a pace, and yelled, "Halt! What does this Polish pig want of me?" Father Maximilian stood facing him, very calm, a faint smile playing at his mouth. He spoke in such a low voice that only his nearest comrades heard him. "I would like to die in place of one of the men you have condemned." Fritsch looked at him stunned. These words surpassed anything he had ever heard. He thought he must be dreaming. He who never listened to an objection, who never reversed a decision, who shot down the rebellious with a single bullet, now stood rooted under the clear gaze that unwittingly subdued him, Fritsch, who domineered as lord and master. But at the moment it was Father Maximilian who commanded the situation. The commandant bewilderedly asked, "And why?" Did he question out of curiosity, or did he wish to regain his self-possession, gain time? He, Fritsch the Bloody, holding discussion with a prisoner. Father Maximilian was an excellent psychologist. He realized that he must make defeat easy for his executioner. Heroics would spoil everything. It was better to invoke an unwritten paragraph of Nazi law: cripples and weaklings must be liquidated. He spoke quietly. "I am old and good for nothing. My life will serve no purpose. In whose place do you want to die? For this one. He has a wife and children. The priest pointed to the man who had just bemoaned his fate, Sergeant Gajonazek. Except for those standing nearby, the great majority of prisoners present at the roll call heard none of this conversation, understood nothing. Their astonishment was boundless. It was the first time that they had ever seen Fritsch talking to a prisoner. For once, curiosity outstripped his cruelty. Fritsch tried to solve the riddle. Who are you? The answer came with solemn brevity. A Catholic priest. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. He did not say religious. He did not say Franciscan. Nor did he say member of the M.I. His humility would have prevented his using the word founder. He simply said, a priest. He would die, he wanted to die, as a priest, because a priest is endowed with the most august privileges which man may enjoy on this earth. He is the master of the body and blood and forgiveness of the Lord. Those on the way to their deaths must not be deprived of the assistance of the priest in their final struggle. A momentary silence followed. What thoughts ran through the head and heart of Fritsch the Bloody? Did he vaguely suspect that what had transpired was utterly beyond him, that heaven had need of him to populate it with a new martyr? He had not the strength to refuse. Father Maximilian was waiting. His face, now clean-shaven, seemed very young and delicately transparent. He did not look at his executioner. He was seeing much farther. The setting sun enveloped him in purple and gold, and he seemed to officiate in this solemn stillness. Never before, during the roll call, had silence lasted so long. At last, Fritsch spoke in a hoarse voice. All right, Gnad. Go with them. He added neither oath nor insult. From that moment, Fritsch kept silent. The lips of Father Maximilian moved softly. He was praying. No doubt, Fritsch the Bloody was among those for whom he had, just now, very simply offered his life. Palitsk, the vice-commandant, awaited the decision, pencil in hand. He very efficiently erased one number from the list and wrote another 16670. The formality was so simple, one number replaced another. But never before had a man reduced to the simple rank of a quantity consummated such a triumph of quality. The fiery ball of the sun was poised on the horizon, and the sky flared like an immense monstrance. The witnesses had never beheld so glorious a sunset. Father Maximilian, the priest, was going to celebrate his last Mass in the liturgical rite of the Common of Martyrs. Another order rang out, march. Barefoot and clothed only in their shirts, the condemned walked slowly toward the block of death. All eyes followed them. Father Maximilian walked at the end of the line, a shepherd behind his flock. His head was slightly bent to one side, and heaven was in his heart. My queen and mistress, my mother. Oh, dearest mother, keep your word. It is for this hour that I was born. They advanced, and little by little night descended. Finally, they turned their backs to the sun and walked into the night. To describe the scene with justice, to portray it in detail, would require the pen of a Dante, or the brush of a Rembrandt or a Goya. There are certain silences that make the angels weep. The guides at Auschwitz never fail to show curious tourists the infamous block of death, where thousands of victims have agonized in unspeakable torture. The horrible starvation bunkers are under the ground, dank, dark cells, most of them without windows. When the condemned of Block 14 arrived there on that unforgettable evening of July, 1941, more than 20 wretched prisoners lay in torment in the next compartment. The thick walls could not deaden their cries, their moans, their screams. The new arrivals were ordered to remove all clothing. Hypnotized by fear, they obeyed like robots. Father Maximilian, however, reflected at that moment that Christ died on the cross naked. He obeyed with full consciousness and with all his love. This nakedness was a heart-rending humiliation. The tyrants wanted to crush them before they suffered this excruciating death. The prisoners had hitherto managed to preserve a shred of human dignity by means of their tattered, beggarly rags so often spattered with blood. Now they were completely frustrated. But, lamentable flock that they were, shoved and beaten with gun butts into a windowless bunker, without air, without pallets, this flock of men about to die was not without a shepherd. The priest was there, not only to die with them but to help them die. The heavy door was shut on the black pit filled with sobs. From this moment on, the condemned would receive nothing to eat, nothing to drink. One of the jailers sneered the Germans, saying, "You will dry up like tulips." The jailers, however, were quick to realize that this time something was changed. Before that day, the starvation bunkers, like miniature hells, had reverberated with the howling of the damned. The first hours and the first days after the closing of the fatal door had plunged them into a frenzy of despair, and only gradual death had succeeded in calming them. But this time they marveled that the condemned did not scream, did not curse. They sang. From the next compartment, where a moment ago there were only cries and screams, feeble voices joined in the singing. This place of torment was transformed into a chapel of fervor, and from cell to cell they answered one another with prayers and hymns. The jailers looked at each other in amazement and remarked, "Never before have we seen anything like this." Some writers have tried to fictionize the secret of this closed cell. They have invented sublime dialogues, sparkling conversations, and marvelous deeds, with Father Maximilian, naturally, as the hero and the protagonist. They would have him, like Socrates before his death, take advantage of these last days to instruct, enlighten, and set these souls vibrating in high contemplations. We, rather, respect silence. In this factual book we have not quoted a single word of Father Maximilian that was not really his, duly certified. We have not related one single fact that had not numerous witnesses to verify it. Let us not try to divine what God has reserved for himself, what he will reveal one day, on his day, the day of judgment, in the most imposing of epochs. It is certain that the reality was much more noble and beautiful than anything our short imagination could invent. To understand a saint, it is necessary to be a saint, sanctus sanctus. But there are moments when there is only one thing for us to do, be silent and kneel. Father Maximilian did not die like Socrates, the greatest of men. To die as he did, this priest had to be immensely more than mere man, more than any great man. He needed that divine supplement for which human nature hungers and thirsts more vehemently than for bread and water. For Father Maximilian it was sufficient that he die exactly as Christ did on the cross. From these torture chambers converted into a chapel there came voices weakening with each passing day. We have only scant details on what happened within. Some few details are supplied by the precious testimony of a prison inmate named Borgauik, who acted as undertaker, since the SS officers would not venture into the pestilential air of those unventilated and sewerless dens. Each morning, Borgauik entered to remove the corpses. He always found Father Maximilian, either on his knees or standing in the center of the chamber, praying aloud even though the others lay like a heap of rags. The SS officers stationed at the door watched the attendant closely so that he could speak very little with the condemned men. His testimony reveals that during those first days they were so completely lost in prayer that they did not hear the door being opened and that only the bellowing of the SS men could attract their attention. Later, some wept and begged for a little water, but Father Maximilian was always calm, asked for nothing, and looked at his executioners with a profound serenity. They could not stand his gaze and demanded, "Turn your eyes away." Do not look at us that way. As they went away, they would mutter among themselves, we have never seen a man like him. Here is a rugged detail that will perhaps offend delicate ears. So much the worse. Let us at least be strong enough to read what others had to suffer. Borgauk testifies that although he was supposed to empty the toilet bucket every day, he was spared this drudgery because the bucket was always empty. Days passed. The prisoners of Auschwitz prayed for the dying. They organized a lookout squad to learn at least the date of their death. It may have been simply a coincidence, but one of the witnesses attested that the sacrifice of Father Maximilian saved the lives of a great many of the inmates, for the officers, touched in spite of themselves, did not beat or kill so many during work. The fact is, as all the former prisoners of Auschwitz know very well, that, from the spring of 1941, the hardships in that camp were somewhat mitigated. The older survivors invariably greeted the newcomers with the remark, "Ha, if you had been here in 1940. I simply state the fact, I do not pronounce on it." Here again, let us cede to Judgment Day the task of establishing certain relationships between cause and effect. In his bunker of death, Father Maximilian prayed also for his executioners. It is not at all rash to believe that in some cases he may have been heard. Days passed. It was the eve of the Assumption. In Father Maximilian's bunker there were only 4 survivors. Of the 4, he alone was clearly conscious. He no longer stood nor knelt, but remained seated. He had dismissed his little flock one by one. The last 3, stretched out unconscious on the floor, were ready to appear before God. The Good Shepherd had finished his task. He had earned his rest. Now, and only now, could he die. At the moment when the jailers entered to finish him, the priest was seated on the floor in a corner, praying. Seeing the hypodermic syringe, he himself stretched forth his fleshless arm for the deadly injection. Borgauk, who could stand it no longer, fled. A little later, it was he who was assigned to clean out the bunker. Upon entering, he found Father Maximilian still seated propped up in the corner, his head slightly bent to the side, his eyes wide open and fixed on one point. As if in ecstasy, his face was serene and radiant. While the other corpses were dirty and had contorted and ravaged faces, his body was spotless, and one could say that it radiated light. I will never forget the impression that this made on me, concluded Borgauk. At the news of the priest's death, his comrades wept for him as for a father. They tried in vain to have his body exempted from the implacable law, but he was burned as were all the others in one of the crematories that smoked day and night. Dies Natalie's Maximilian Kolbe, in Vigilia Assumptionis. The faithful Virgin came to take him on one of her most beautiful days, when the entire church was making preparations to celebrate her supreme glorification. Would it be foolhardy to believe that she was holding in her hands the 2 crowns which she had one day long ago allowed him to glimpse, the white and the red? I have taken up the gauntlet. I have accepted the challenge. I have kept my imagination firmly bridled, and in this story, often improbable, there is not one word nor one fact that is not true. And now, Pierre, my brother, and all you numberless others who have shared his despair, do you believe me? Birthday of Maximilian Kolbe, the Vigil of the Assumption. This is the way in which his passing will be recorded in the official Roman martyrology.